If I were to say to you, competitive Pokemon, chances are pretty good that unless you're part of the scene, that's going to sound to you something like competitive hopscotch. Last year, you see, I got into competitive Pokemon, and I know how that sounds. It has the cultural weight of competitive sandcastle building, you know? I got into competitive Pokemon because when you look at what competitive Pokemon is, it's chess. It's chess if chess let you choose your pieces and how they move and attack. I bred Pokemon, I EV trained them, I made sure they got their egg moves. It was a little tedious. It required commitment, and it was rewarding because it required commitment. If it was easy, everyone would do it, and achieving it wouldn't mean anything. This year, I competed in a tournament. I was excited. For the first time, competitive Pokemon felt like a space for me. And Game Freak just made it clear that they don't want players like me anymore. Competitive Pokemon has a real problem. It's not a problem with the game itself, it's a structural problem with the brand. Pokemon exists for one primary reason: to sell merchandise to children. Pikachu plushies, Pokemon cards, keychains, stickers, lunchboxes, backpacks. The entire franchise is built on a simple economic model. Create shit that kids love, and they'll beg their parents to buy them that shit. That's the engine. That's why Pokemon exists. And it works brilliantly. Pokemon prints money. Kids love it, parents buy it, the brand is everywhere. But there's a problem. A legitimate competitive scene has grown up in spite of that brand, not because of it. Competitive Pokemon requires depth, strategy, system knowledge. It requires treating the game seriously. And that's directly at odds with the existence of Pikachu plushies. When you say competitive Pokemon, most people don't think serious esports. They think that thing kids do on the playground. They think of the cartoon. They think of the collectible card games played by children. Which itself is crazy because the Pokemon trading card game is every bit as complex as Magic the Gathering. But one is for kids and one is for adults. Melee players are respected, League of Legends players are respected, but competitive Pokemon players are politely humored. This is a cultural legitimacy crisis. The IP's entire identity is children's entertainment. Pikachu plushies, gotta catch 'em all. Licensed merchandise. That's the public face of the franchise. The competitive layer exists, it's deep and it's skill-based. But nobody outside the community takes it seriously because everything about Pokemon screams, this is for kids, to buy toys. The two scenes are directly at odds. The brand is optimized for selling merchandise to children, but the competitive scene requires being perceived as serious. And you can't make merchandise-driven children's entertainment feel serious. Not when the parent company's business model depends on selling Charmander plushies. And that's the barrier keeping people away. Not complexity, not the number of Pokemon available, not unevolved Pokemon. The barrier is that competitive Pokemon doesn't sound like a legitimate competitive space, because Pokemon as a brand is fundamentally about selling toys to children. And here's where the contempt becomes really obvious. The competitive format doesn't even match the games that people play. For 9 generations, the Pokemon games have been singles battles. You send out one Pokemon, your opponent sends one out. That's it. That's the entire single-player experience. Every gym battle, every random NPC battle, every Elite Four battle, every trainer battle in the main campaign, barring a few exceptions, are singles. The competitive format, it's doubles. It's 4 versus 4. 2 Pokemon on the field at once with all the additional complexity that entails. Weather teams, trick room, ability interactions, positioning, it's a completely different game. When new players try to get into competitive Pokemon, they find out it's doubles and they lose interest immediately. Wait, why isn't this like the game I've been playing? It's a legitimate question, and Game Freak has never adequately answered it, or shown new players what doubles even is. Even the Scarlet and Violet DLC, which was supposed to showcase competitive Pokemon, did not highlight doubles properly. The entirety of the second DLC for Scarlet and Violet was just 2 Pokemon fighting at the same time, 2 individual Pokemon fighting at the same time. The vast majority of players will ask the same question. Why aren't the official competitive battles singles? Doubles is more complex, that's true, and I actually prefer doubles. But Game Freak's response to complexity is always the same. Hide it, simplify it, don't trust players to learn it. So they give players a game that teaches singles for 40 hours, and then tells them, actually, competitive is doubles, and acts shocked when those players don't convert to competitive. This is contempt. Not accidental design, not oversight, contempt. So Game Freak looked at competitive Pokemon and concluded the problem is that it's too complicated. So they simplified it. Pokemon Champions launched a few days ago, and they capped the Pokédex at 186 Pokemon, less than 25% of the full roster. There were no unevolved Pokemon, no experimental strategies, no Eviolite Chansey tanking hits that it probably shouldn't be able to, just the safe picks, the obvious choices. Pikachu, for example, is the only unevolved Pokemon in the format. No serious competitive player uses Pikachu. It just doesn't happen. We don't even use Raichu because the entire evolutionary line sucks. And yet Pikachu is available in Pokemon Champions. It's not about accessibility at all. It's about bringing in Little Timmy and selling Little Timmy more f***ing plushies. However, Hoshino, producer of Pokemon Champions, explained the reasoning. At launch, only final evolutions will be available. After we introduce a lot of the final evolutions, we might consider earlier evolutions as well. For now, this approach is more accessible for new players, except for the fact that new players who don't know the mechanics of the game love Pikachu. Everyone knows who Pikachu is, whether they've ever played Pokemon or not. So if they have never played a Pokemon game and they sit down with Pokemon Champions and they see Pikachu, they're going to put Pikachu on their team. And what's going to happen? Pikachu sucks. They're going to get slaughtered. Not because Pikachu sucks, they're going to get slaughtered because they didn't bother to learn the mechanics of the game before they sat down to play competitively online. But putting that aside, they're going to see Pikachu and they're going to want to use Pikachu, and Pikachu sucks. So how can you say that this is meant to be more accessible for new players and you put literal new player bait in the game? You put noob bait in the game for players to choose the most popular Pokemon in the franchise, the face of the franchise. You put that Pokemon, weak as it is, in there, specifically for players to add to their teams, while trying to make it more accessible for new players. This really reveals what it's really all about. And it's really all about just bringing Little Timmy in and selling Little Timmy more plushies. But that's their diagnosis. Accessibility for new players. And the assumption is clear. People don't play competitive Pokemon because it's too hard to understand. They also removed IVs from the competitive format, not because IVs were broken or imbalanced, but because IVs added complexity, and this makes it one less thing for Little Timmy to worry about. And this is kind of frustrating to me because I knew that if I put 0 speed IVs on my Incineroar, then it would automatically underspeed certain things and therefore act first inside of Trick Room. And if I put those 31 speed IVs on that Incineroar, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. Breeding for 0 speed IVs is a real thing that I've done repeatedly and that most competitive players have done at some point. Like, we want those IVs intentionally. And now those options are gone. Those Trick Room strategies of 0 speed IVs, because everyone always puts 31 speed IVs, it's gone. No longer exists. Because the disease that they're treating is complexity itself. The problem is, that's not actually the disease. So before we go further, let's be clear. Pokemon is already accessible. I got into competitive Pokemon last year, and breeding a team is not hard. In Scarlet and Violet, you can breed a competitive Pokemon in hours, not weeks. The little picnic thing lets you skip most of the tedium. Experience Candy lets you level instantly. Nature Mints let you fix natures. Ability Capsules and Ability Patches let you change abilities. And Hyper Training exists to let you max out IVs. The barrier to entry is already low. You don't need to be some hardcore player to have a competitive team. You just need to care about having one. You need to want it enough to spend an afternoon breeding and training. And that's not gatekeeping, it's filtering. A barrier to entry isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's what makes the achievement meaningful. If competing in Pokemon took 15 minutes, it would be worthless. But it takes a few hours of intentional effort, and that effort is what makes it feel earned. Little Timmy could breed a competitive team right now if he wanted to. The mechanical barrier is low enough. What stops him is that he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to spend an afternoon optimizing Pokemon. He doesn't want to learn the metagame. He doesn't want to compete. And that's fine. Not every game is for every player. But it also means that games designed to appeal to little Timmy aren't going to appeal to me, and they're not going to appeal to other players who actually want complexity and competition. Game Freak is treating the symptom, low participation, and ignoring the disease, cultural perception that Pokemon isn't serious. And the cruelest irony of all of this is that simplifying Pokemon Champions proves the exact point that's really keeping people away. The legitimacy problem is that people don't take competitive Pokemon seriously because Pokemon is marketed as a kid's game. Game Freak's response to this is to make it simpler, to remove complexity, to add guardrails and training wheels. Do you understand what that communicates? It communicates, yes, this is a kid's game, it needs training wheels, we had to make it easier for you. That's not solving the legitimacy crisis. That's confirming it. Real competitive spaces trust players to learn. Chess doesn't have a simplified competitive mode. Melee doesn't say, we're removing wave dashing to protect new players. League doesn't remove mechanics to make ranked easier. They add education. They add ranked queues where you play against people your skill level. They trust players to learn and improve. Game Freak does none of that. They just removed some of the depth. And in doing so, they told the world, yes, competitive Pokemon cannot handle real complexity, so we had to simplify it. You don't build legitimacy by proving that your game needs training wheels. You build it by proving that your game has depth worth learning. The 186 Pokemon cap sounds abstract until you think about what it actually removes. It removes Eviolite strategies, Pokemon like Chansey, Porygon 2, Dusclops. These aren't busted, they're roles. They're valid strategic choices that trade evolution for bulk or utility. Knowing when an unevolved Pokemon with Eviolite outperforms its evolved form is exactly the kind of system knowledge that separates a casual player from a competitive one. But it's deeper than that. It removes the innovation that comes from understanding those roles. I used Dusclops competitively in the tournament that I participated in earlier this year. But I did not give it an Eviolite. Instead, I ran a mental herb. Because everyone expects Dusclops to have Eviolite and to be a wall. So when they saw my Dusclops, they assumed that it was bulkier than it was, and they didn't target it. That assumption becomes a strategic advantage. They didn't target my Dusclops because they assumed I was holding an Eviolite, and that left me free to use a different item. That's the layer that makes competitive Pokemon interesting. Not just pick the strongest Mon, but understand what your opponent expects and use that expectation against them. And Pokemon Champions removes that entire axis of play. It removes a lot of the team diversity. With 186 Pokemon, the meta narrows. You see the same threats, the same answers, the same archetypes, and this is already a problem. In Regulation I and Regulation F, you see the same Pokemon over and over, even with hundreds and hundreds to choose from. I made it a point to seek out and use unusual Pokemon, like Okidogi, Abomasnow, Garganacl. With 1000 plus, you can get innovation. You get people trying weird things. I found out that Okidogi has an attack stat that's only 2 points less than Urshifu, and has an incredible move pool. Absolutely incredible. You make Okidogi an attacker. I've had Okidogi sweep entire teams by itself. Start out with Okidogi. If they misplay, Okidogi can sweep the entire team. And I've had it happen repeatedly. And that's because you can try weird things when you have more Pokemon, because you have that depth. When I bred my first competitive team, I didn't just slap together 6 Pokemon with good stats. I made choices. I decided which threats to cover. I decided whether I wanted to speed control or bulk. I decided on my team's architecture, and that architecture mattered because I had options. And I had to choose what Pokemon the opponents were going to use that I was going to counter. Pokemon Champions removed a lot of this. They said, here are your 186 final evolutions, pick 6 of them. That's a training wheel. And this is actually insulting to me as a competitive player, because little Timmy doesn't want to play this. Game Freak simplified competitive Pokemon for a player who doesn't exist. A new player who wants to compete but is too intimidated by unevolved Pokemon. A new player who wants to compete but who doesn't understand the basic concept that unevolved Pokemon are weaker than evolved Pokemon. Or a player who understands that evolved Pokemon are stronger, but somehow needs the rule set to protect them from that knowledge. That player isn't real, he's a fiction. Because if little Timmy wanted to play competitive Pokemon, he would play it. The barrier to entry is low enough already. He would breed a team, learn the meta, and compete. But he's not doing that, because little Timmy doesn't care about competitive Pokemon. He's playing Roblox or Fortnite or some other game that actually feels serious to him. Game Freak simplified competitive Pokemon for a hypothetical player while actively driving away actual players. I got into competitive Pokemon last year. I competed this year. I was excited. I had invested time. I had learned the metagame. I had put in effort. I loved Okidoki precisely because it was a hard counter to Incineroar, which is rampant in competitive. And this year, Game Freak told me, that complexity you earned, that depth that made competing feel like an achievement, we're removing it. They didn't gain little Timmy. They lost me. This is contempt. Not incompetence, not misunderstanding. Contempt. Game Freak had a choice. They had two options. Option A, keep the full Pokedex available. Yes, this entails a lot of 3D modeling, but you are the biggest intellectual property on the planet. I fully believe that you're capable of 3D modeling 1,100 things. Like, the idea that this is too much for Game Freak to handle when they manage the biggest IP on the planet is insulting to everyone at Game Freak. It's insulting to every game developer who's ever made a video game. It's insulting to everyone who ever installed RPG Maker. It is simply insulting. So keep the full Pokedex, trust players to learn, separate casual and ranked queues. Invest in education and marketing that positions competitive Pokemon as a serious space. Or option B, simplify everything. Remove unevolved Pokemon, cap the roster, remove IVs, treat players like they're too stupid to understand that Blastoise is stronger than Squirtle. And they chose option B. And the contempt is shown in the reasoning. We're doing this to be accessible. We're protecting new players. This approach is more friendly. They think that you're too stupid to know not to bring Squirtle against Venusaur. That's what's going on here. They think you're too stupid to know that. Game Freak literally just told the entire player base, we don't trust you to understand basic game mechanics. So we removed your choices. Evolution has been a part of the series for almost 30 years. If players out there still don't know that evolving a Pokemon makes it stronger, then no amount of training wheels is going to help them. A player who is that incapable of pattern recognition is going to lose competitively no matter what, and they're going to have a bad time. A player who lacks so much knowledge about the mechanics that they don't know that Pikachu is going to lose to Geodude is a player who is always going to have a bad time. They're always going to lose. The player who throws out their Squirtle against the max level Venusaur, they're going to lose. And no amount of training wheels is going to change that. They deserve to lose. Some companies respect their players. They respect players enough to trust them, to let them fail, to let them learn. But Game Freak doesn't respect competitive players. If they did, they wouldn't be designing a format for a player who doesn't exist, while actively pushing away the players who do. So I'm out. Not because Pokemon Champions is too hard, but because they proved they don't respect what competitive players do. They simplified the format for a player who is never going to show up. That's not game design, that's contempt. And contempt doesn't build a competitive scene, but it can kill one.